All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this work session for the Tigard-Tualatin School Board. And this is really a time for us as school board members just to go over something that we didn't have time to do during our retreat. Um, Tigard-Tualatin is calling me. The school district is giving me a call. That really just to kind of think about what we want to do as a board this year, what we want to accomplish. And I sent out and had attached the sort of a rubric with some of our goals from last year, the 23-24. And it was funny in a way because we really wanted to do a lot and a lot of pretty hefty things, which were all really good things. And also life happens and unprecedented things happen. And so those sort of we didn't get to all of those. And so what I want us to do tonight is just sort of think about, and I can make a copy of this rubric that we're using and take notes on it. And because kind of think about what we want our goals to be for this year as a board. And in addition to that, there are a couple thoughts I have just around sort of not necessarily meeting norms, but just ways that kind of some thoughts I have about just our meeting times together, which kind of fall under kind of being together as a board. So we can kind of I'll bring those up when we get there. So just to kind of start off, if you have the one that's open that we had last year, we can go from that as a working document. We can also just think about, something from scratch and really what we want some of our focus to be, because I think in sort of the theme with the new superintendent and really having some laser focused goals, I do think there is, and sort of getting back on track, because we didn't get off track last year, but we didn't get to a lot of the things we wanted to, really making sure that we're setting ourselves up for success. So we feel like, okay, here are 6 instead of 15 things we want to accomplish, and we did that. And I think we had really wonderful and lofty sort of goals, and some of them we do anyway, and those are easy. But just kind of that's one thing that I wanted to keep in mind as we went through this year. So really, this is not formal meeting time. This is a work session just to kind of get our thoughts on paper. So if somebody wants to jump in or have a thought, or we can start in each goal area if that's an easier way to structure this. Okay. Does that sound good? Starting with what we have. Okay. So that first one is learning together as a board. And so last year our goals were to attend the fall OSBA conference and form and participate in a policy review work group. And so this is kind of one of those that we've sort of done a little bit. Although one thought I had I'll stop. That's a lot of me saying words. So with that learning together as a board, the 2 we had from last year and sort of those mechanisms, are there thoughts about how to change those, what to take away, what to keep? Yeah.
I wonder if we might have like a mid-year retreat, like a half-day mid-year retreat, much like we did in the summer. Come together 4 hours, do some more intentional work wherever we feel like we left off. I know that we got a lot done in a pretty short period of time, but we may just want to pick up or reassess, and that would be one idea for doing some learning together.
I really like that. And I think one area where a lot of us are pretty new to the board, and things that sometimes are always changing. But I think sort of the continuing education of board governance is an important one, and that might be something that would be nice. We have some things that we're working on. We have that mid-year retreat to kind of look at some of those areas and see what we still need to grow or lean into. So I really like that idea of a mid-year retreat, and I'm adding notes in purple to everybody's working copy. So
I really like that idea too, and I think we could probably make the timing of it such that it's right before the start of the legislative session, and that we can kind of use it as part of our generating our legislative platform and our advocacy timeline and what we want to get done when. I think that would be, because it's really hard to know now what that's going to be, but by then we'll have a much better idea. So that would be a really natural thing for us to grab onto and run with.
I love that. Crystal or David, any thoughts on adding that as a goal?
I think that would be nice. It'd be good to have a mid-year check-in where we can kind of recalibrate as needed.
Perfect.
Are we still planning on doing that ACC revision in alignment with EEAC? Is that an ongoing annual thing we'll continually be doing?
I think we can decide if that's, I mean, I think it probably should be. And I think the other thing we can either fold, well, I don't know if this is learning together. That was the other thing. Like, I don't know if that's a learning together piece or just sort of some of our ongoing work. But I do know that one thing we talked about last spring was continuing to look at our new behavior policy and really make kind of looking at the data around that and how sort of what the data is saying about those, referrals or the kids that are or not sort of having unintended impacts from that. And so maybe that's something that I don't know if it fits in learning together as a board, but I think continuing to aligning ACC with the EEAC and continuing to kind of either align or relook at that behavior policy to make sure that we are attending to things that might have.
I think it probably falls more into the hold the system accountable. It could also be in the conditions for success category, but I think I kind of like the idea of using it as an accountability. Like, is it doing what we wanted it to do, and what do we need to tweak in order to make it do what we want it to do?
Yeah, Crystal, I like that.
I'd actually be interested in just hearing what people's priorities are without letting the previous goals constrain that thinking, because I think it would just be more informative, and then maybe we can use whatever element of that template still works. So, and along those lines, I do think reviewing that policy and handbook to see how it's working would be a good element to have in there.
Do people feel like adding that down to the holding the system accountable section is good rather than learning together as a board? Is everybody okay with moving that?
Yeah.
Yeah. We could also have a goal like around discussing or continuing to improve classroom learning and learning conditions.
So
that's kind of what we're trying to do, is like ensure good conditions for learning.
yes. And so then it's kind of like, as a board, then what is our piece of that puzzle? So part of that is looking at policy. Part of that is the data review for sure, but kind of thinking about at the board level. So like, let's think about, and that might be creating conditions for success, sort of adding something in there about, and thinking of as our role of school board members, what is that, the care and concern around class size and class conditions, like where can we affect that? Is that okay? So let me make a couple of, keep talking, I'm going to make a couple of changes.
So I think the action item we have under create conditions for success, that is complete a TTSD legislative platform, that should certainly be moved up to the first category of learn together as a board. If we're going to have the retreat, that's where that action item should go.
Director Zershmade, is your microphone on?
Yep, it's on.
Yeah, it was kind of quiet.
How's that? Is that any better?
That's better.
All right.
And I can bring materials and information for you that's pertinent to the legislative session, if that would be helpful for this group, so that you just have a better pulse of what's going on and decide how you want to proceed.
Yeah. And as pre-work for that, OSBA just held a legislative advocacy webinar this afternoon. So that could be a nice sort of make that homework for ourselves prior to, because it'll be recorded and put up on the website for everybody.
And there will be a part 2.
Which is good, because I got halfway through part 1 this afternoon and then the internet went out at my house.
Okay, so I've added the mid-year retreat around board governance and legislative advocacy work, and then I brought those two, legislative platform and advocating for education policy, up to that.
Yep.
That would align with that. So Crystal, maybe a meeting in the middle is, let's kind of think of learning together as a board. We can see what's there, and then, so we're not kind of going all over the place just because we only have an hour. And so conference, Jill will make that thing. And then kind of like, okay, so we've looked at the two that we had. Are there additional goals that would maybe fit in this that people would like to add? We can kind of do that section by section. Does that feel like you're not being sort of like hindered by what's here, but also adding new ones?
I mean, that's fine.
Okay. So are there any other, so for learning together as a board, thank you for adding those dates. Attending the OSBA conference and a mid-year retreat. Oh, and let me take out this actively monitoring policy work group and adding that back down. Anything else that would fall under that, and we can certainly, if we think of things, come back up to that as well.
Do we have any intention as a board to go to the national conferences this year? Or this would usually be the year we wouldn't, but do we want to do that or have a subset go or skip it? Because we've done it more recently.
That might be a budget.
Why don't
Yeah,
we
it's
just say, have it
definitely
say, why don't we just say OSBA conferences? And
Well, when's
not
the NSBA?
Yeah.
Or well, why don't we just say conferences then, and then
Oh, it's in April.
we don't constrain what we end up doing later?
Or at the mid-year retreat, because it'll probably be before April, we
There
can
you go.
talk about if
We
we
can talk
want to
about it
do
there.
the, so let me add that.
Genius. Yep.
I have like one or two good ideas a day or week, so that I'm at my, yeah. Yep. And it's Monday. Okay. All right. Trying to make this clean. Okay, so creating conditions for success. And again, this can go anywhere from looking at class size to, in terms of what we are sort of able to do in our role. We have the AROI, ensuring that students and staff feel welcome, supporting the whole child, and advocating for, we can take that out.
Actually, no. I think here
both?
we have it both. And actually, I think now that I'm looking at it, the advocate for education policy that we've got as an action item above actually should be down here still.
Okay.
Because the meeting is setting the platform, but the condition for success is doing the work.
Okay. And again, this is really a first, we have this work session. We'll look at the first read tonight during the meeting if further changes need to be made. So I don't want anyone to feel pressured that we have to get through this whole thing, but I want it to be meaningful.
Are we going to have a major curriculum adoption this year?
Yeah, there'll be some curriculum adoptions. I'll have to get back to you on the full list, but we have some that are planned to go this year.
Okay, so we should still keep that one then.
I'm wondering about adding number 4, advocating for resources and policy framework necessary for student success. So maybe adding something in there around, like part of our advocacy work is around the budget, which also affects that classroom size or student-teacher ratios, and maybe that would be a place for that, or what would feel, because I think that's important, and also what's in the scope of.
So you mean maybe specify financial resources?
So I'm just trying to think of, because I think.
It literally didn't say class size, although that's a good idea.
What did you say? I'm sorry. I thought it was class.
I said classroom conditions.
Oh, conditions.
So I was talking about
I'm sorry.
the behavior policy. I think we'd talked about reviewing that
Okay.
regularly, and so it might make sense to put it in there, although I know we discussed, if someone could remind me what we had talked about, which element was going to be reviewed quarterly.
Okay. So, and I apologize when my teacher hat was on, I think classroom conditions, and I automatically go to like classroom conditions. And so I apologize for that assumption.
Certainly an important element, though. I think advocating for resources, period, because how we choose to use those resources would be different than advocating for resources unless the state tells us exactly what to do with those.
Yeah.
Right.
As for the behavior policy piece, I think that is where we can add the language under the policy review work group and specifically address that. And we can add that as a third bullet point, but kind of if we want to do that around the behavior policy and looking at that quarterly data.
Mm-hmm. And the student handbook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the behavior matrix.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay.
Except, hang on a second, we've got there the make needed adjustments. That should be the action item, not the goal.
Okay. Yeah, review behavior
And
policy
it's
outcomes.
It's not just policy. It's I think it should be specific to the specific policy and the student handbook should be referenced because that's really what we're talking about here.
So review behavior policy and student rights and responsibility handbook data and outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Crystal, for adding that.
Does that fit with what you were thinking?
I think
Dr.
that
Weston?
gets to it.
Yeah, that seems good. Do we want any kind of time frame in there?
We don't have a time frame specific for anything else other than the convention that has specific dates. So I would say no, we haven't in the past, given it's what we do. That's our goal for the year, is to have done that at some point during the year, completed it, hopefully.
So maybe, but
Or are you thinking to put it in like twice a year, quarterly, monthly? Is that what
like
you're
a
kind of
quarterly
thinking?
review of, at least for this, I mean, that can drop off, but I think for this first,
Yeah.
my first thought around that is making that a priority to make sure that the work that we did last year does not have negative unintended impacts on students. And so this first year, it's maybe quarterly or twice a year, but enough so that we don't go through a whole year realizing it had horrible impacts on a subset of students.
Yeah.
And then maybe next year that's twice a year or yearly.
Well, I think we don't want it to have any unintended outcomes, and then we also want to make sure it's actually working as intended. So,
Right. I mean, I think that's what the review does, but I think my point of having it, if everything was working great and we saw that at the end of the year, that's fantastic. But if something was really had unintended consequences, I wouldn't want to wait till the end of the year to know that. So I think having either,
What did we ask
semester
staff to, how often did we ask staff to give us reports this year? Is that what you're looking up, Superintendent?
I'm just reviewing the goal and to ensure that the stuff that you're focusing on has alignment. And so I'm just making sure I'm keeping up with y'all.
My concern is I don't want to be asking staff for quarterly updates if they're expecting to give every 6-month updates, right? Or at the semester break updates. So I want to make sure we've got those aligned because there's a
I think
workload
it's
issue
quarter.
involved.
Oh, sorry. I think it's quarterly, but why don't we, this is just a first draft, right? So why don't we make sure to check that so that it's aligned with what staff's doing?
That sounds perfect.
But, my suggestion too is to, if we know the key performance indicators that you all would like to see, then we can determine what feels the best and what's most useful for how frequently we provide updates. There are some, if we're talking about student performance, for instance, there's some assessments that you would be really helpful to receive quarterly. And then you have some assessments that happen once or twice a year.
Yeah.
And so there wouldn't be much to report. So I think if we that's what I was kind of looking at our KPIs to see what would be most helpful for us to be reporting on and tracking. And that way, when you do have the retreat, if there's something that's really germane to that moment in time, we can provide that information or a progress report. And then for the next time that we all come together, or you all come together, we can give you the any other updates that would be helpful for tracking your goals.
Perfect.
Could I ask, how often does the behavior committee meet? Is that quarterly? Will they be looking at any of this information to make any suggestions, or if they're seeing kind of patterns for us to be thinking about?
So we'll probably have more information because that's tied to bargaining, that behavior work group. So last year, I'd have to look back. It might have been it was pretty frequent, I feel like, at the beginning, and certainly around when we were creating the policy. So I don't know if that will stay the same though this year.
What were your thoughts about that, Director Weston?
Well, I was thinking that as the new, and it's still really new, policy, administrative rules, and handbook are rolled out, I was thinking that our frontline people, our teachers and classified staff and whatnot that are working with our students are going to have a good sense of what elements are working and what are kind of unintended consequences, or it's written this way, but it doesn't quite function as expected. So I was thinking if they're looking at that, then it would be really informative for us to have that information and feedback. And if they have suggestions, they might be really informative for us to know and think about and consider incorporating.
That's great. And I think that last year when they were forming that group during negotiations, that was really part of the intent, was kind of looking at some of that work and being able to report back to the bigger body in terms of what they're seeing, what's still not working. And so that could possibly be, something that, depending on how often they meet, we can ask them if they would be able to share what they're seeing and the feedback from that group as well as part of that.
Who's yours?
Somebody?
I was just going to say, I think a quarterly review and then changes as needed makes the most sense.
And we can definitely provide a quarterly review on behavior. One thing that I would encourage the board to consider, I've heard a few times what is working and what's not working, and to shift the focus potentially to what are the patterns that we're seeing, what are the trends that we're seeing, especially when it comes to some of our disproportionate discipline, because that's one of the goals that we're focusing on as a district, and to see what type of progress we're making as well in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Kristen, did you?
It's something different. If we're not done with this, I don't want to interrupt this. Okay. Just a clarification on one of the action items in this section, the third bullet point down. It says support the development of professional learning that is broadly inclusive and focused on the needs of all. What does that mean as far as an action item for us? Like how do we do that? How do we measure that we've done that? Does that support come in budgetary support, policy support? Like what does that mean? I would want to clarify what our expectation for ourselves are.
That's an excellent question.
I have always assumed it meant budgetary. The time and the money to have the substitutes so that staff could do the PD that's necessary.
Maybe we could just add that word so that other folks know what we mean by that.
So pass a budget that supports the development.
Or just budgetary support for.
Yeah.
Well, it's just we've got pass a budget that addresses blah, blah, blah.
Just add that to it.
So
take out one, that gives us fewer bullet points.
Or make them two, but it's the same. That's always the way I imagined it. I don't know if anybody else imagined it a different way. I'm certainly not going to be providing the professional development myself. I think that would be a bad idea. Nobody wants that.
Okay, so I added budgetary support. What was
pass a budget that supports.
Okay.
I actually think it would be nice if we had a corresponding outcome or mechanisms for success for each board goal. So because there's bullets, I can't quite tell, but I'm pretty sure there's more bullets than there are numbers.
Yep, this is what we did last
So-
year. So
but-
some of them, I think there are a couple, we could probably space them differently or color code them, but I think there are a couple have multiple bullet points for that one goal.
Yeah, I think it might make sense to have more of a table format. So number one, use academic return on investment, and then in the cell to the right of it, it should have the corresponding goals.
Yep, I can
Be
do that.
good to rework it that way.
1A, 1B if they have multiples.
Yeah, thank you.
So for create conditions for success, if we jump back up there briefly, so use the academic return on investment, the piece, which I think we would want to keep.
Mhm.
And part of that is passing the budget that addresses student and staff needs, and passing a budget that supports the development of professional learning. Ensure that all students and staff feel welcome, included, and empowered in TTSD spaces. Continue to support the whole child by monitoring and addressing unfinished learning, and supporting social, emotional, and mental health needs.
Yep.
And then advocate for resources and policy framework. This is kind of the hefty one in terms of goals and action items. Are there other things that we want to add? Does this feel good as is for this?
This is sort of the epitome of what board governance is. So it's what we've always done. It's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be doing a whole lot more than this, because then we're outside of our wheelhouse.
I think the goals are really broad and might be hard to focus our efforts. I think they are good, but they're too broad and all-encompassing for us to really be directed by them. So I think honing in on a few areas might be more ultimately productive.
Okay.
So like number 3, it's good, but it's almost like everything the district does. And then that kind of means there's no goal if we list everything. We could leave that, but maybe we could pull out a few more specific items. Like the policy one's really specific, like it's exactly what we would be doing and how more. So,
and I think some of the ways that I think we could make that more specific, and some of those bullet points sort of bring the specificity to our work, which is sort of adopt curriculum that is vetted using an equity lens, reviewing all programs, including SEL programs. So that's where we can get a little more specific in what we're going to do, even though the goal, and you're right, they are sort of these overarching, these goals.
I think that is where we capture what our role is, right? Is where the bullet points underneath
Exactly.
those, right?
The
This
the
is
bullet
work of the
points are what we
district. This is
do.
the work of the board over here.
Yeah.
And if we want to make more specific bullet points to kind of capture how we know, because I think the point is valid. Like, how do we know if we've met our goal? And when they're like continuing to support, seems very like that's vague. But are we reviewing programs? Are we making sure that curriculum is adopted and, that has used an equity lens and has been vetted for cultural and historical accuracy and all of those pieces? So we can maybe add, if we need to, kind of make those more specific.
So one thing I'm interested in is I think we've done a lot of good work making sure we're using the science of reading and trying to get young people caught up in reading, especially by 3rd grade. But I don't think we've had the same focus on math, and we've been kind of, as a district, talking about how we're going to get there or we're going to do it next. But I think it might be good to hone in on that a little bit, because that's the area that we've seen the most learning loss, and that we're kind of could have the most improvement. And so we've already looked at some of our curriculum. We've done a lot of things, but maybe if we could look at what else we could do, there's a lot of things that factor in, like attendance. I think some of our curriculum that we've done a really good job bringing up to standard recently. I think we have a couple more that are upcoming. Is it that we're not getting through? Is it our approach to homework? Is it the length of the school year or the size of the class? But it'd be good to sort that out, like once and for all, if we could make some real headway on that.
I agree with that. Yeah. I'm wondering if that can be addressed maybe in the SIP goal sort of area versus these board goals, because my first thought is that is all true. And how does that fit within our board role? So certainly could ask the question or make sure, are we being provided data on math improvement opportunities or whatever it might be. But also I think maybe that is a question or focus, and maybe the district and the administrators and already sort of has a plan for some of that, in which case that question more specifically, not so much a board goal, can be drilled down into during those SIP roundtables and really kind of seeing how those are being addressed. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I'm going to kind of back up a little bit. I think earlier in the conversation, you all were talking a lot about being really intentional and being really specific on your goals. And so I think if there are goals that are naturally part of our responsibility as a district, as district administrators who are responsible for learning, we'd be happy to take that off your plate and then report to you at your leisure, whether that's monthly or quarterly or in writing, to provide updates. And we're always willing to provide updates in the boardroom too, in terms of what we're doing, what type of strategies we're using to ensure that students are experiencing success and that we're being creative in our efforts and innovative in our efforts to help advance learning. But I think as far as your goals go, it's really the you all need to determine how many things you want to take on and how far you want to adventure into teaching and learning.
Yeah. And I think our goal that we have about supporting the professional development, is the key part in that of what can we as a board do to impact that math is being taught in accordance with the curriculum we adopted last year. Is more professional development needed? Is the professional development that's there sufficient to get to the end result that we want?
I think the key word that you said, Dr. Udo, is strategies. That it's not our job to figure out strategy. That it's our job to work collaboratively with our superintendent to set the vision and the overall strategic priorities. But then we monitor those and the conditions for success. But as I always say to boards, it's not that we don't get to do strategies. We don't have to do strategies. We hired somebody to do that for us. And so I think it is our job to be really informed, but we do have to pull ourselves out of coming up with the strategies. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Would it make sense to have a goal along the lines of support the district's focus on strategies to elevate math instruction or something along those lines, math achievement in the district? So it shows that we're supporting that, but we would be just kind of being intentional, but because obviously we don't even know, I think our experts would be better able to identify what strategies, but maybe our goal would be to support the development, like identification and implementation of said strategies.
Is that a question for me or for your colleagues?
I feel like you might be better suited to answer that, Dr. Udo Sanada, but if anyone else has any ideas. But I mean, obviously I'm not trying to propose something that's not our role. I'm literally trying to accomplish something here. So I think you might have a better sense of how to word that, but I don't want to just kind of do nothing just because we can't do everything.
So I would go back to what Dr. Miles just said about the board supporting district strategies is a way to be most helpful. We need to be nimble as a district, and we normally try to be really intentional about the goals that we're setting. And so, if we communicate an instructional goal, it could be related to math, it could be related to reading, it could be related to attendance, which then begets opportunities for reading or for learning in a variety of different areas. And so, I would, I guess, caution the board against getting too specific in the academic goal that they're suggesting, unless we've all collectively talked about it in a retreat that this is an area that we really need to focus on. But I think for now, I think just the support and the academic strategies that we've articulated is what would be most helpful.
So one thought would be, it almost makes it more broad, but continue to support the whole child by monitoring and addressing unfinished learning. I mean, we could kind of just continue to support the whole child by monitoring and addressing instructional strategies, period. And then, or at least continue to support. And then perhaps one of the action items would be to review and monitor all programs and data, so that we're making our goal in theory a bit more broad, but it opens it up for, it isn't necessarily, which this did, and it needed to last year and probably continues to need to do, to focus on that mental health, social emotional kind of strategies and programs. So it really kind of broadens that. Then it would include, all academic programs. So we could do something like that, because I think it's not really, and I think by not having a goal about something, it doesn't mean that we're not doing anything about it. It just means here are the areas that we can really focus our work, and that we have the ability to, see or advocate for change or continue what's working. So I think that would be one thought on that.
But since the item number 1 is all about using the academic return on investment specific to the academic performance of students, it feels like we've already got that covered. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of calling out, we're going to do it with literacy, we're going to do it with math, we're going to do it with science, because we're going to make somebody mad when we don't include their
Right.
particular pet, whatever. Like, how come you didn't mention the arts? How come you didn't mention? It's just easier to say it's all of it.
Yeah.
And as staff discovers, here's a problem we're seeing, give them the power to address it without having to come to us to say, hey, I know you guys said you wanted to do math, but really we're finding over here that something else is on fire right now. Can we work on that? So I think keeping it broad and
Maybe even more broad than it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As,
Okay.
Well, no, as it is now.
Okay.
It's the
SEL
improving
mental
the,
health.
the number 1, improving
Oh, yeah.
academic achievement for
Yes,
all
yes, yes.
students, keeping it nice broad there so that teachers and administrators have the ability to be nimble, as the superintendent mentioned, and address the things as they come up during the year.
So then I wonder if that is really all encompassing. I'll make smaller hand movements. If number 3, because I recognize there's a part of my brain that's like, if it's not called out, is it that we're not matter? It doesn't matter, but also we can't call out all of the things. So kind of like policy, it's necessarily broad, and then the action items that we need to do can be specific. So I'm wondering, I'm fine with keeping number 3, but there's potentially a way, and Crystal sort of wordsmithing something too, to kind of, that's somewhere more than number 1, but sort of addresses number 3 in a different, more holistic way. And so that would be one thought on that. Crystal?
So I'd like to propose adding support strategies that address unfinished learning / learning loss.
Okay. Yeah.
And we have our integrated guidance,
Yeah.
which is a state accountability measure that focuses on everything from 3rd grade on track reading to 9th grade on track, attendance goals and graduation goals. And within those, there are key performance indicators that we've generated within the district as well, to support a lot of the academics endeavors that we know we need to focus on. And so those are things, again, that the teaching and learning team can present to you all. And I think they align with your first goal of supporting academic return on investment, because as a board, if you're focusing on supporting our strategies, and then the role of the board may be to monitor the fiscal stewardship that's going into the resources that we're using to achieve those goals.
Yeah.
So that's one way that we can braid the district's goals with the board goals, and so that we have alignment.
I like that. Kristen?
And I just want to mention that the act of monitoring is actually very powerful for a board to do. That means that there are expectations that have been set, and that we are receiving data to measure progress against those expectations. And that, there's a collaborative conversations about if course correction needs to be made, we are part of that conversation. We don't adjust the strategies, but we are monitoring that progress at a high level, at the board level. And so whenever we see the word monitoring in goals, that's a very powerful practice that is appropriate for a board to do. So I would encourage us all to feel like that is a really important action to take. And that is, that's a great word to have in this. So not to breeze by it and feel like we're not doing anything when we see the word monitoring.
I think that's great piece
It's
to add.
a key component of the accountability.
Yeah. And wondering if too, not to put too fine a point on it, and then we can move to the next couple sections then and come back to here if we need to, just so we get through the whole thing once. But, for that bullet point around reviewing all programs, because the other piece with review is oftentimes it's sort of an autopsy. And so really maybe to monitor and review programs and data, sort of doubles down on that point. While it might be in the goal, it's also, that's the action that we're taking, is that actively monitoring those programs to kind of make sure, the strategies are working, the things that have been set out in strategic plan or in district goals are all sort of aligning. So that might be another area, a little change. Are we good to at least put a pin in this so we make sure we get to the last two? We kind of looked at the holding the system accountable, but then we can always come back to this one. Just, I want to make sure we get through everything once. So we did add the quarterly review piece, number 3, made some changes there. Anything that people want to add in terms of that bucket of holding the system accountable before we kind of look through the ones that we have?
Just a question on the bullet that says adjust discipline policy and student handbook. Are we adjusting the student
We cannot.
handbook?
No.
Right. So we should maybe reword that.
Yeah, we can't do that.
However, I think, back to your point, monitor the student handbook is absolutely appropriate.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Review
Maybe don't delete it, maybe
review-
put monitor.
Review data regarding
Yeah.
the efficacy of the handbook, something like that. And then that gets to Director Weston's point about it. Are we doing unintended harm?
And is it working?
Yeah. Yeah. Is it working? And are there? Yeah. I mean, I think those are both sides of the same coin, certainly.
And do we assume that we are adjusting the discipline policy quarterly, or are we looking at it, right? Because I think we should
take out the
I don't know that we
adjust.
want to commit to adjusting it quarterly.
Unless
So I
we
think-
have in there as needed, which is what I think we had originally.
So this might be another monitor and review.
Yeah. A quarterly monitoring.
Yeah.
Right, because the policy is ours. We can change that as
Yeah.
needed. But we don't want to change it just because, oh, look, it's been 3 months, time to
Right.
change it again.
Or it was a board goal. So have we not met our goal if we didn't change it? Okay. So anything else that we want added to that section? And I will, for the second read, I'll go ahead and put this in a easier to kind of match up the goal with the action items format. But anything else for that piece? Thank you, Director Weston, for making little changes as we're going. Appreciate that. So the last one is build public goodwill. So maintain a positive working relationship with community partners, particularly as it relates to the upcoming bond. That actually still applies.
Do we want to add the local option in specifically as well? Since we have 2 this year?
Yeah. It's going to look like LOL. But I'll know what it means when I make the change. So continue to offer public comment opportunities at board meetings, which we will, of course, do. And some folks don't know that is, a lot of boards opt not to do that. So that is something that, because you don't have to, but we will, I think, always do. Provide multiple outlets to collect community input and communicate back to the community. Foster partnership opportunities and programs with our local government partners, chambers of commerce, local businesses, nonprofits, and other community leaders. Yeah.
I think that's good, but the public comment element, I think it might be interesting if we kind of had an intent with it. So if we said something like, and I think, not that we don't do this, but if we put something like commit to listening with an open mind to public comment, I think it would show kind of a spirit of collaboration. So obviously we're going to have public comment, but kind of having a goal that involves kind of how we're receiving that public comment. And that would just be kind of to show willingness to kind of partner and be open-minded with the community. Yeah, it's kind of a difference between doing it and kind of feeling it.
Yeah.
It's certainly nothing we're not doing now.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, you're adding it. Okay. Anything else around public goodwill?
I'm wondering if we need to expand the goal beyond just community partners and just make it community, because it's the whole shooting match.
Yeah.
I mean, unless we want to have another specific one to community partners, but it feels like they're part of the community
And I
anyway.
think that
So
public goodwill is where we
Yeah.
would want that really to be prioritized.
one of the things we did years and years ago that we haven't done for a long time is hold listening sessions. I don't know if that's something we want to leave open the option for, that we could do that as needed, as necessary, as warranted. Getting back to Director Weston's idea of listening with an open mind, is like, do we want to offer those up? I mean, I don't feel like we have an issue that requires it now, so maybe we don't want to put it in a goal because we might not need it, but just a seed.
It would almost be like, and all I who knows this reference, the Big Block of Cheese Day. Does anyone know?
Yep.
Any West Wing fans in here?
Yep.
That's also President. Yeah.
I'm reading the new book.
Yeah. And I believe it was President Madison that did, like, brought a big thing for everybody to eat, but it was like the day where anybody from anywhere could come to the president's office and, like, do you want a bridge up for wolves in Alaska? Do you want this, whatever the idea was, as big or small, as wild or mundane. But it was sort of like that original, like, listening session, and, like, everybody just came and they listened to all of it. And so,
Yeah.
we could have a Big Block of Cheese Day.
We could. I mean, we certainly have it at every board meeting.
Yes.
Essentially.
I know.
How about some toppings instead?
We could rename public comment to Big Block of Cheese time.
Yes. And it would, like, you would eat until the cheese was, it was a whole great thing. I will bring the historical context to it next time, but I do like that idea of I think the idea was too, it was less formal and less intimidating, because it would be much more of sort of like we wouldn't have to be behind here. We could all just sit and talk, or people could come one at a time instead of having a big audience. So that would be something to consider. That might be fun. I did that a couple times at the high schools. Like bring me all your.
Yeah, that's where we've done it in the past, is we've gone out to the schools where it's easier for folks to get to us.
Yeah. It'd be fun. Think about that. I'm going to make it not official goal. We can all, so it doesn't feel
just
like.
Put the seed in your mind and
yeah.
mull it around for a while and see how it pops out.
Okay. All right. We have about 10 minutes. It's going to help me remember. Big block of cheese idea. Anything else in our last 9 minutes that we want to think about in terms of goals or those mechanisms? Yes. Oh, Director Weston, I'm sorry.
So a few things. The first is I think it might make sense to split the bond part off, because I think maintaining a positive working relationship with the community is its own goal, and then the bond might be, it actually might be one of the bullets in the other column, or it might be a separate thing. But I think we want to have a good relationship with the community, period. And then if we need something, then that's like we're going to ask the community. But of course, we would want to have that goodwill regardless. So I think like we don't really need to tie it with that.
Yes,
it's a good point generally.
And I think when we were talking about this last year, I think all of us were here. It was more about the making sure we were educated. It wasn't like I'm having a relationship with you so I can get something. It was because we thought at this point it would be happening in November. Part of that goal was the education and engagement piece from the public around what that bond would look like. So that was the intent around that goal. It was not, I'm having a relationship with you to ask for something later. So
yeah, I agree. I just think we could, if we put it on the other
I'm not
side,
saying not to divide it. I'm just letting kind of, that's when we did this last year. That was sort of the
Well, but we could make the measurement point past the bond, past the local option. And those are our two measurement points for that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, one of the measurement point. I think
And
it
then we
makes sense
fail
more of a
miserably
measurement
if it
point.
doesn't pass, which.
I put a note in there on how it can be revised.
Yeah, I'll take it.
And then the other thing, and I don't know if we would modify this section and make another section, but I think it would be good to have like an improved labor relations element, or foster strong labor relations element.
Okay, what would that look like from the board versus district perspective, I guess?
Well, we have ideas about maintaining a positive working relationship with the community.
Right.
Surely we can apply those to staff as well. So that might be opportunities for listening. It might be something about cheese. It could be, I mean,
Well, we do have up at the, well, when you said labor relations, I mean, that's something different than like community building public goodwill, right? That sounded different, but we do have up at creating conditions for success, ensuring that all students and staff feel welcome, included, and empowered. Yeah. And so we could either pull out another bullet point for that, but I think that's sort of getting at least part of what you're looking at there.
yeah, I think that one's getting, I think that one's speaking equity, which is important and should have its own thing. I think I'm talking about supporting positive relationships between the board and staff, or district and staff more.
Okay.
You know, I think it might be useful here, since we've got for our superintendent, one of his goals, right, is building with the community. So our goal as a board is facilitating that and expanding upon that. As he's doing it, so are we doing it, to build that sense of community with staff, with students, with our community partners, with our legislatures. And that's how we could maybe make that work.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. And I want us to remember, you know, I think there are our mission and values, and of course our working agreements as a board. And then, so we're kind of narrowing the funnel. So again, we can certainly pull something out that is specific to making sure that we are creating opportunities for, or that, for engagement or communication or good relationships with everybody in the district, staff maybe called out specifically. Also, I want to be, because I think that's incredibly important. And I think you said this earlier, there are a lot of things that we're kind of already doing. And so just making sure that whatever that action item is, it's that balance between, if we don't have it in here, we're not saying it's not important because this is just 1 year of goals, and also what parts of those are part of our strategic plan, part of our mission, part of our values, part of our board agreements, and really what are our goals for this year, that could even be more specific than some of these, and just kind of balancing that. So, we can add something specific to staff, or those constituents, somewhere, but also not getting back to the point where we have 17 goals. If that makes sense. Okay, this was good. We have a bunch of things.
Given that we have only 3 minutes left, I think, unless there's something somebody's got that's glaring, I think if we can get you to put this into a draft and then we'll look at it for our second time, I think we're most of the way there.
And then a couple of things somewhat related to this, a couple of changes that I'm just wondering about, kind of related to goals, maybe, and not really working agreements. The first is, I'm wondering if, because there's a slightly different, not structure, but I know that the cabinet and the superintendent are having sort of an ongoing log during meetings. That's while there's public comment happening, there might be notes taken and immediate action being done sort of behind the scenes. I know that was the original intent for part of the board member reflection time. And so my wondering is if we need that saved space on the agenda anymore. I know that one of the concerns was making sure that if there were things that needed to get on the agenda, that was one piece of it. And the other piece was circling back and making sure that there was some sort of closure or some part of sort of circling back to public comments and any additional information. And so I think because we have a slightly different system set up for that, my thought is that doesn't need to, I'm happy to leave it on there. But that was one thing that I was wondering about, people's thoughts on that.
We haven't used it a whole lot, so it seems like if we've now got a system in place which will make us need it even less, why don't we try taking it off? And if we find that we miss it, we can always put it back.
Any thoughts? Is that okay?
I agree. I think that one of the things that we never want to do is use any of our time to accidentally spring surprises. Yeah. And I don't, in my short time on the board, I don't think we've done that, but I think that we could unintentionally do that by bringing something up at the end of the meeting that would be a surprise or a request that is a surprise. And and if that is an avenue to accidentally do that, I think it would be good to maybe, proactively curtail that.
I agree. So are we okay with trying it at least and seeing? Is that okay? Is that okay? I heard from you. Crystal, is that okay?
Yeah, I don't think it's ultimately been very useful.
Okay. And then the other question was, on a lighthearted note, do we want to redo our group photo for the website?
Are some of us unpleased with the current photo?
No. This was a district question, like, hey, do we want to update the picture because it's a new year? And I said, I have no preference. I will ask my colleagues.
For context, I serve on a different board, and they do like an annual picture at the beginning of the year. So I didn't know if that was something you all wanted to do. I do
think we
know that
should.
one time I had used your photo in a presentation that I made, and there were some comments made by you all about how you wish you had a different photo. So trying to be accommodating.
Sure,
think we
let's do a
should.
new one.
Yeah, we should. On a day that I wear pants, though.
Yeah.
On a pants day.
Long pants.
right.
He means long pants.
Yeah.
We'll give you a heads up.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Okay,
we'll have
we
time
will-
to do a fresh hair dye job.
Yeah,
before.
so we'll make a date where everyone will know that that's when it's going to happen, and not just at the end of our board retreat last year, which is when I think that was taken. So
You can wear matching clothes.
yeah,
We'll
we
bring-
will
we'll match it.
coordinate.
One thing I realized after we'd done all of our retreat stuff, we never did do school liaisons this year. Did we want to do those? Did we decide we're not going to do them this year? I don't know.
I thought we had decided we weren't going to do that.
Did we? Okay.
Did we?
I couldn't remember.
Didn't we?
Or
And we were going to like try to.
I'll have to check the notes. There was something that Mike was saying.
So I think when we were talking in the retreat, we talked about creating a system where there feels like there's equitable access for board members to get into buildings.
I remember this now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was that helpful? And so we certainly want you to get into buildings and to feel the presence and to see all the good stuff happening in our schools. So I think it's just about finding a way that gives you all access.
Okay. All right. Anything else? All right. With that, I will adjourn this work session at 6:02 p.m.